Power is not plane specific. The output, meaning the unit, watts, joules per second, whatever it is context dependent, that's for sure. And because the output is dependent on both force and velocity, if a movement is too far force dominant or too far velocity dominant, the power output isn't going to be as high as a movement that is like kind of heavy and kind of fast. And this is obvious to most people. I see this take and it's often coming from someone who's like a self-described quarterback specialist or a pitching specialist that power is plane specific. And the implication is that if you perform movements in your sport that are in the transverse plane, you need to use the weight room to improve your ability to produce power in the transverse plane. If you perform movements in the frontal plane in sport, you need to use the weight room to train for power in the frontal plane as well. You'll see things like throwing as rotational power or throwing as unilateral ground-based power. You see these types of statements often in high-performance athletics. Drew McDuffie is a great example of this. I mentioned him in my previous video. He's like the quarterback specialist at Virginia. Just go look him up. But all these categories for power are just made up. There's no need to categorize all this stuff. Training specifically in the transverse plane with the intention of improving your throwing velocity or velocity of a baseball off of the bat is misguided. Yes, the output is dependent on the context, but power is not a plane specific thing. It's a general quality. There's absolutely no need to differentiate between the planes. There's no such thing as transverse power, sagittal power, frontal power, vertical power, horizontal power. None of these categories mean anything significant. If you want to start categorizing power in this way, you could come up with a never-ending list. The funny thing about calling a movement rotational power is that there's an infinite number of ways to rotate around a joint. For example, just look at the upper limb. Say you're performing a task in which the shoulder is rotating. The power could be created with different muscles, different movement patterns, with differing degrees of lower body contribution based on the exact task at hand. So under the category of rotational power, that could just be an umbrella category with different subcategories underneath it. You see how this could be never-ending. And once you accept one subcategory of power, you have to accept the next one. So there's no need for these categorizations of different power. Power comes from getting the organism as strong as possible and moving as fast as possible. Of course, a quarterback's going to produce higher power outputs when throwing a football compared to an Olympic weightlifter throwing a football. But having a quarterback not do the Olympic list because that's sagittal power, so it's not going to transfer to something like throwing, which is transverse power, is silly. This way of thinking is just a great example of not recognizing stimulus for stimulus. So don't fall for this trap. That's all I got for this video. I'll see you next time.